Hi, I'm Pat Beall. I'm an investigative reporter with the Palm Beach Post, but I am not really talking about investigations tonight. I'm sitting down with Sharon Daugherty, who is the Sexual Assault Outreach Coordinator. I have to read this because it is a very long definition here. Division of Victim Services and Certified Rape Crisis Center for Palm Beach County. Thank you so much for being with us. And also joining us is Cathleen Scott. Kathleen is the founder and managing partner of Scott Wagner and Associates, a firm that deals with, among other things, sex harassment cases and gender issues. So you may have culled from all of that what we're talking about tonight is what, some people have called, the great reckoning at this point of, story after story about I tried to make a list and I couldn't quite do it. I was at Matt Lauer and Garrison Keillor and Al Franken and our former president, and the list goes on and on and on, which I guess is really the point. The list does go on. And I've kind of likened this to a teapot, You put a teapot on the stove and you hear it whistle. If you don't attend to the whistle, eventually the top will blow off and there will be an explosion. And that's kind of what it feels like to me. Mm-hmm. And Kathleen, I wanted to start with you and talk about harassment cases. You've handled harassment cases in Florida.
So, yeah.
And, are there companies that are better than others? And what kind of harassment do you hear about, actually?
So our firm handles all type of discrimination and harassment claims. And most people don't realize that sexual harassment is actually a form of gender discrimination. Mm-hmm. And so our firm handles those primarily on behalf of employees. Certainly some companies are better than others. It really boils down to the culture. When you're an employee, the balance of power is not equal in the workplace. Mm-hmm. And so an employee really looks to large part to management to really set the tone. Mm-hmm. What's going to be tolerated when I work here? Mm-hmm. Is this going to be tolerated? And if I go to management with a complaint, is it going to be addressed, or am I going to be retaliated against and suffer some kind of retribution? So in my experience, employers are all over the place. Yeah. Some talk the talk, and they have the handbooks, they have the HR, they have the policies, but are very light on enforcement. And some companies are excellent. The second you make a complaint, the first word out of their mouth is "thank you for telling me." They investigate and they take action. And so this reckoning, as you call it, is great awareness, right? But it can't stop there. We have to do something about it. Like, what's going to be the lasting change that comes as a result of all of this discovery? I'm kind of taken aback by, I keep hearing people say, I'm so surprised. But in my field, we know that there's gender inequality. We know that it's out there. And the statistics tell us that women are still being paid about 25% less than men for equal wages and for equal jobs that are substantially similar. So this is really an extension of an overall view of women in the workplace and a strive for a need for equality.
Well, it almost sounds like what you're describing is like, if a woman in a workplace or women in the workplace are not treated equally, that has a demeaning effect that makes harassment more possible, more acceptable? Is that what we're saying?
Absolutely. It's a tone. It's interesting, as a male, when you walk into a boardroom, I don't know that you worry about things like, is everyone going to be thinking about whether I look attractive, or are they going to be paying attention to what comes out of my mouth? Yeah. And so it's just a very interesting dynamic. Yeah. And yeah, I think absolutely, if the company's culture isn't such that they're valuing people based on their ability, seeing them for what they can accomplish, what they can achieve, what they can do, what their education is, as opposed to valuing them on, idolizing them, looking at them as a sex symbol, that's devaluing to a female.
Yeah. You mentioned something earlier that there's really no economic incentive for women who might have been harassed like years and years ago in Florida to come forward. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so we've had a lot of inquiries about, how can you believe these women who are coming out now, so long after the fact that these incidents happen. And, I thought it myself, too. Something happens, you think that a more credible story might be to raise that issue when it's happening close in time. But, the interesting thing is, from an employment standpoint, if you want to bring a claim of sexual harassment, the narrow opportunity is really small. You really only have 300 days to bring a claim under federal law and 365 days, so a year, to actually bring a claim, to have a viable economic result from bringing a claim for harassment. So these women who've waited years and years and years to bring these claims. Well, we can always question their motive, but we can really dispel that their interest is in bringing that type of claim because their time would be largely barred from doing so.
So Sharon, I know we were talking earlier that you're already plugged into issues of victim advocacy, and you mentioned something that I really kind of want to touch on is why would people not believe women? Why would managers not believe women? Why would colleagues not believe women? Why would your friends and your family not believe you when you come forward with a story? So
I think that a lot of people find it shocking that someone that they know, trust, and care for could be guilty of doing such atrocious behavior.
Mm-hmm.
That's the same way the victim felt when they were attacked or abused or harassed.
Mm-hmm.
They're also shocked and let down as well. Mm-hmm. They've just suffered with it in silence. And so when they come forward, not only are they having to come up against revealing intimate details about themselves, which that in itself is embarrassing, what happened to them. There's a lot of shame and self-blame that goes with that. Mm-hmm. But they know they're going to be up against this disbelief, which makes it even harder to come forward. I hear people say things like, oh, they just want 15 minutes of fame. Mm-hmm. Who would want that kind of fame? Come on. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of other ways to make your mark in the world than to be attached to that kind of issue.
Yeah.
And it's hard enough, too, to come out by yourself. Mm-hmm. Then you find out other people have been suffering along the way. People that are silent might not know how many others this person has affected, because a rapist does a rape once, they keep raping. Mm-hmm. And people that sexually harass, it's their method of operation. So yeah, not being believed is a big deal. People not believing, they might not want to admit the pervasive culture.
Well, I think that's it.
Is happening.
I kind of see that, and you kind of see it in comments on message boards. You see it in comments to newspaper articles, which is, I think there's just this underlying feeling of disbelief that this is so widespread. It's just hard for people to get their heads around. Mm-hmm. And, unfortunately, one of my concerns is that we're going to wind up with what I call a McMartin preschool moment. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if everybody, who's listening to this or watching this remembers that, but there was a time in this country where we had this large national discussion about childhood sexual abuse. And, it was a large national discussion. And what happened was that there was a single case in California, the McMartin preschool case. And there were really dramatic allegations. Many of them were disproved. Some of them could not be proved. There was certainly evidence that some of the social workers may have gone too far, may have been completely unprofessional. And it was almost as though we pivoted on a dime. The entire national discussion after that turned on, kids lie. We have a lot of bad social workers who are out to prosecute. We've got a lot of overzealous prosecutors. And then we fell into silence, almost as a country. It was like we couldn't grok this, we couldn't handle it. And so it would be at least another 10 years before we talked about child sexual abuse again. And that was rather narrow because it was the Catholic Church and priests. So I'm leading up to this. I'm leading up to Garrison Keillor is what I'm leading up to. And is Garrison Keillor going to be our McMartin preschool moment? Because I have to tell you, before I came over here tonight, I'm talking with my younger son, and he's been appalled, right along with the rest of us about Matt Lauer and the rest. He's never been a Prairie Home Companion fan. And he says, I don't know about Garrison Keillor. So have we come to a situation where we have a person who's been accused, and it seems so outrageous and so long ago, and the consequences so draconian?
It's an excellent point that you make, and we have to be sensitive to the fact that not everybody accused of harassment is going to be guilty of harassment. Mm-hmm. And we want to, do we want to live in a workplace where you can just say the words out loud, sexual harassment? Everyone's so walking on eggshells that we start terminating people. They have due process too. I too have 2 sons, and I'm sensitive to that as well. And so I think it's important that we be careful and that there has to be investigation. But really it comes back to very simple culture. It's all about the culture. If you create a workplace that's based on treating people equally based on trust, then I think you're going to eliminate the likelihood that this sort of thing can prevail. And it shouldn't be a surprise. You know, I think that's really the most important thing, is making sure that you've created a culture and a complaint department and an HR department that's open to receiving complaints and who knows how to conduct an investigation, so that we do protect the people who are accused as much as we're looking out for the victims as well and trying to make lasting change.
Right, we need that balance, but I would like to give some numbers. For instance, 15%, that's all that reports rape, which means 85% do not. So take the 668 rape victims that we served in Palm Beach County in 2016. Take the 85% that didn't report, that's 4,400 and some, do the numbers. That's a lot of people who didn't report for many reasons. One of the biggest, afraid they're not going to be believed, blame themselves, the shame, the guilt, fear, you name it. So then of the 15% that report, there's only 2 to 8% that could be false. So we're looking at such a small percentage. And I know you're saying, would this turn the tide and shut it all down? I don't think this conversation will ever shut down again, because it's gotten too big, it's worldwide. And one claim that might not be true isn't going to shut this down now, because it's too strong and powerful. I don't think we'll go backwards.
Yeah. Well, you know, you're talking about rape, and then there is the Judge Roy Moore situation, where, you know, you're talking about somebody who may not have, let's say he didn't rape anyone. Let's say, you know, he didn't, well, let's just say he didn't rape anyone. You know, he was still trying to attract 14-year-olds, 16-year-olds. I think the girl whose yearbook was signed, I mean, I think she was 18, but she looked 11, you know? So it's kind of a queasy feeling. So you have, not rape, but you have something else entirely. And we were talking just very briefly before we started about the age of consent. And really, you know, what age should we be looking at? Should we be looking at the girl's age, or should we be looking at the fact that he was in his 30s and that vast, you know, span of years between the two of them?
Yeah, I mean,
You had some thoughts
harassment, either in the workplace or to an extreme as sexual harassment or abuse, is really about power and control. And so it's appropriate, I think, to look at the alleged harasser's age, because the only reason a person like that is able to intimidate, overpower, treat differently someone who's so young is because they're in a position of control, either because there's such a big age difference or because they're their boss and they control their wages and whether they're going to have a job to bring home to their family. And that's really the hallmark principle about harassment, is, you know, removing that control factor, removing that intimidation factor, and making it so that there really is zero tolerance. I mean, people say that in their handbooks, right? I mean, every employer has a handbook that says, we have zero tolerance for harassment. But do they act on it? Do they investigate it? Do they eliminate it? Do they make it such that the culture, everybody who works there knows, we can't act like this. We need to treat people the same. We need to be on good behavior when we're at work.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we teach, I do a lot of trainings at the colleges. The conversations are fantastic, because some of the young men are saying, I didn't even know it bothered anybody all this time. Because I'll say, did anyone ever sexually harass anyone in a group you belonged to?
Right.
Were you around, and what did you do? And they were saying, well, until this conversation, I didn't know it was bothering the women so much. So I'll give them examples of growing up.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
Give me an example. I want to hear some of those examples.
Well, I asked them,
Yeah.
and they're very smart, of course, they're educated. They say, well, we can't call, or we just stare at their breasts, or, they're right on target. It could be standing too close to them, brushing up against them, following them, all the way up to stalking. But one of the things I say to drill it home is I say, okay, the culture looks like this. Every woman in the room, have you ever been taught that trick about putting the keys between your hands?
No.
Guys, did you ever have to do that, or were you taught that? Were you taught not to park or walk into your car. If there's a van, usually it's a white van,
Yeah.
and the doors are going to open up and grab you and pull you in. But guys, have you ever been warned not to walk into your car because a van is
Maybe
parked?
drink alone, or
Have you had to look
Alone,
under your
yeah.
car and in the back seat? And all the many things. Do you carry spray? Do you carry, all the things you need? A whistle?
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
And you're like, no.
Well, when Anita Hill testified, when Clarence Thomas was being confirmed as the judge, and I think that was really the first time I remember any kind of national discussion about workplace harassment. I'm not asking you to tell me how old you are, but you were younger than me, I'm pretty sure. And so I was having lunch with two men I worked with who were dear friends and still are, and my best friend who was married to one of them, and we were talking about it, and our perceptions were so different that I said, it is a miracle any of us ever get married and have children, because our experiences of the world are so different, And when this started coming up again, when this reckoning discussion, the list you just ticked off, I started thinking about it, and I thought, yeah, that's a different world, so I don't know. What did you think of the Anita Hill hearings? And was this a case where we had collective amnesia as a country afterwards?
I think it's a dirty secret we don't want to talk about because it's unattractive.
Yeah.
We'd like to think that we've come so far in equality, and we have. Certainly it's better, but at the same time, there's a lot more work to do.
Yeah.
And I think the Anita Hills of the world, they demonstrate two things. One, that there's a difference in how you're going to be treated in the workplace if you're female. But the second thing, which might be the most important part of the dialogue, which is what happens to you when you do have the courage to speak up. You're a statistic. So few people, so few women want to say, hey, this happened to me. That's what we need to ask the question. Why is that? Why is there such a fear of retribution or retaliation in the workplace setting that you're going to make this complaint, bring it to the attention of management, to all these companies that have this so-called zero tolerance, and yet there's always a risk that you might be fired for it. Maybe not that day, maybe not the next day, but when there's a layoff, or when there's a performance improvement plan that's going around, or a bonus, maybe you're going to be thought about differently because you've had the courage to speak up. And that's really, I think, the essence of making sure that preventing it really has to do with sort of embracing those who have the courage to bring it forward, and making sure that they're looked at and it's investigated and they're not retaliated against. Really, the first word should be thank you to someone who says, hey, this happened and this is wrong and I need to bring it to your attention.
Right, that's just like event that we're working on for April. April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. I was just on a conference call with the Florida Council Against Sexual Violence. They're gathering all the rape crisis centers together to work on this project. It's called What Were You Wearing?
Oh, sorry. Oh,
Have you heard of
still?
it? Yeah, it's still going on,
Yeah.
and regretfully, it could be something like What Were You Wearing, but it could be, weren't you already dating him before?
Right.
And
Why did you let that happen?
yeah, weren't you guys partying? I saw you guys drinking at the bar together.
Yeah.
So it could be all kinds of invalidating things and accusatory things that people will ask.
Yeah.
So the What Were You Wearing is going to be an art installation of survivors recreating the clothes they were wearing, and they're going to have their story next to it of explaining why that has nothing to do with the rape or the assault.
That's amazing.
And then we're going to have the installation around town.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
I look forward to that. So again, I'm Pat Beall, and I'm talking with Sharon Daugherty, Sexual Assault Outreach Coordinator for Palm Beach County, and Cathleen Scott, a local employment and civil rights attorney, and we're talking about, I'm going to call it the Great Reckoning just because I don't have enough adjectives in my vocabulary to really get a fix on it. And one of the things I wanted to point out is that this is not just about women being harassed. And I think that, there have been, I think the most high-profile case maybe was the allegations involving Kevin Spacey. But, I have recently heard of a situation where possibly several young men, have been harassed at work. So it's not, it's not just women. And I'm wondering, have you had cases?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Same-sex harassment is actionable, but the law has a lot of catching up to do.
Yeah.
So we happen to work and live in a state, Florida, which may not have the most progressive of regulations that prevent harassment, which is one of the challenges. I mean, it's only been recent that we have same-sex harassment as protected. A lot of people are surprised to know that if you harass someone on the basis of their sexual orientation, it may not be protected. And so there's a lot more work that needs to be done.
Yeah.
In Florida, you have to work for an employer that has at least 15 employees for the anti-harassment and anti-discrimination laws to even apply. But it's not limited to women. We tend to think about sexual harassment in terms of, you know, it's women, but really it's harassment can be anything that happens to you because of a protected characteristic. So there's racial harassment, there's same-sex harassment, sexual orientation harassment, obviously sexual harassment, and gender is irrelevant. It's really it's because someone's sexually propositioning you, or if they're trying to make your workplace intolerable, or the environment intolerable because of the fact that you happen to be a different gender or the same gender. And that's really the hallmark principle is unwelcome behavior.
Yeah. And Sharon, we talked a little bit earlier about women of color.
Right.
And can you address that a little bit?
I would love to, because what I'm hearing, and they are correct, is that the black community has spoken up to say, listen, it seems to be led by white, affluent women who feel empowered enough to claim their voice. Where are we? And our goal as sisters to them would be, and sisters and brothers, to center them in the conversation and to make way and step back and invite people of color in, and all genders, non-binary, transgender, LGBTQ, the men, all of that. We need to reach out to everyone, because we might be the voice right now, but it's a chorus, and we need everyone represented.
Yeah. And you had said that you're not terribly surprised at this vast outpouring. How about you, Sharon?
No, I've been waiting for 30 years. Welcome to my world.
Yeah. So
I'm pleased to have this conversation, even when someone says something that I consider uneducated. This conversation has to happen, and there's going to be pushback, even from people that I thought were more aware and conscious. I'm aware that sometimes they carry around these stereotypes and beliefs, and they're being challenged, and change is hard for anybody, especially with this.
Yeah, you're nodding your head.
No, I applaud the women who've come forward, and I agree. I'd like to see it to be a little bit more multiracial, multicultural, and across all gender lines. Yeah, really, that would be fantastic.
So, you know, I promised my son I would embarrass him as much as possible while I was doing this. So we were having a discussion before I came here, and it's actually a discussion that I had a version of a discussion I had with a couple of men at work previously. And I want to know, first of all, if you all have heard versions of this same discussion, and if so, how you address them. You have two sons. I don't know how old your sons are.
Teenagers.
So. Oh, they're teenagers. Well, good luck. God bless. So it was, you know, again, you know, my youngest son was saying words to the effect of, you know, men and women in the workplace are always going to be men and women. They're going to be attracted to each other. What if I date somebody, it's consensual, we date for a year, 20 years later, I get a phone call from a lawyer, and I'm being sued for harassment. Now, I know how draconian that sounds, because I told him that is so draconian, this is never going to happen. But I've also heard, you know, I've heard a couple of guys say something similar, and you were talking about a hug, non-hug you would receive.
Right,
So,
I
yeah.
think that people are being extra careful. So the hug that I got today, normally it's more like, you know, we hug. Oh, sorry. Microphone. Oh.
Yeah.
But the hug today was like this.
A lot of air.
A lot
between,
of space.
Yeah. So what would you say to, you know, to men? Oh, and the other man said, you know, tongue-in-cheek. He said, we've come, you know, we men, we understand now what we need to do. We need not to date. We need not to, you
But I would
No,
also
because
like-
grandchildren hopefully are in my future,
That's
so let's
right.
not that
Yeah.
be the,
Yeah, let's not go there. So what would you say from a legal viewpoint? I mean, what kind of risk does somebody have or
I think the
not
focus
have?
needs to be on whether it's unwelcome. And so in
Okay.
your example of
Yeah.
the hug, can I give you a hug?
Yeah.
And wait
Mhm.
for the woman to say yes. I think the different issue is you just come throw yourself on someone and give them an unwelcome hug. And maybe that's where the focus needs to be. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with meeting people in the workplace, asking them out, having a casual conversation. The difference is using your position of power
Mhm.
to dominate a particular person, to get sexual favors, sexual attention. That's where you draw the line. Friendship, nothing changes there. I mean,
Yeah.
zero tolerance for sexual harassment in the workplace does not mean you can't have social friends, meet and date, have consensual relationships. You just need to make good judgments about the way you go about that, and maybe make sure you have consent. It's funny, are we going to do video consent? Take a selfie? May I?
I've heard of that.
May I hug you?
Really?
No.
Oh, I hadn't
We don't
heard
want to
of
live in.
that.
I don't want to work in a workplace like that.
Yeah. I
I've
didn't-
heard, well, when I speak to the students
Mhm.
and different audiences, consent is in the presentation, and we really hammer it out.
Yeah.
We use a fantastic video put out by the United Kingdom
Mhm.
on consent is similar to offering someone a cup of tea.
Mhm.
And they really drill it down. Would you offer, if someone says yes
Mhm.
to a cup of tea, they're very clear, yes, I'll have a cup of tea.
Yes.
Mhm.
But then if they fall asleep before you're finished the tea, don't pour the tea down their throat.
Mhm.
Or if they change their mind, let it go. They don't want the cup of tea. And it
Yeah.
goes on from there. And even though it comes out in a funny way,
Mhm.
it really explains all the different nuances of consent. They talk about someone who's inebriated.
Mhm.
You cannot have consent from someone who's drunk.
Yeah.
And if you were having sex with someone last week, doesn't mean you show up at their door and expect to have sex with them just because they did before. So it really lays out all the different situations. Consent is a huge factor. And they're saying, ask for the permission and get enthusiastic
Mhm.
consent. Because sometimes people don't
Wow,
come out and
that's the
say
issue.
no, and that doesn't mean they did or didn't want to. It means you need to really be clear on what they do and don't want. Cultures are different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, some
And
people are
some
gonna
women want to
shy.
be asked,
Mhm.
or want to, you know, are shy
Yeah,
about
yeah.
saying, you know, yes, you can hold my
Right.
hand, or yes, you
Right.
can be with
Mhm.
me. We probably need to talk to females and make sure they're giving good communication
Mhm.
and giving signals that are clear and not confusing. Because I think it can be confusing,
Yeah.
especially dating. You know,
Yeah.
it takes a lot of courage. You know,
Mhm.
if a guy walks up to a girl and says, "Hey, will you go out with me?" and there's a mixed signal, we need to
Right.
empower women to make sure they're sending the right, clear message. You know.
Yeah. I think party manners count.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think party manners count. So, you know, just in wrapping this up, I want to talk about a little bit about kind of squaring the circle. Let's say you're somebody, and you've made a mistake, and you're beginning to realize you made a mistake. Of course, the mistakes, we're still talking about this huge continuum. There's the mistake of somebody who, you know, patted you way too enthusiastically, you know, maybe a little bit below your waist, and maybe that was friendly, maybe that was just creepy, you know, all the way to sexual assault. And how do you square the circle? Where does forgiveness come into this? Where does making amends come into this? And how does that work in helping us get to, I think what we all really want to get to is a workplace and a society where we're all pretty clear with each other, we're all fair with each other, and we still all want to have relationships with each other too. So, you want to tackle that, Sharon?
Sure. I know that forgiveness is way at the end of the continuum for healing for survivors.
Mhm.
They can choose to or not to, but when they're confronting their perpetrator and that perp wants to ask for forgiveness and they own what they've done or not. The forgiveness, it's up to the survivor to decide what he or she wants to do. And I know there's been discussion about whether that should influence the consequence we put on the perp. And yes, in a court of law, the victim impact statement is a powerful tool in helping jurors and judges decide where this is going to go.
Right.
I think that forgiveness is a huge, deep issue, and it's not just going to rest on the tenets of religion. It doesn't look the same for everyone, but I think it is vital, because how are we going to heal as a society if we can't get those perps to a place, or any of the men who have done things that may be afraid to even come forward and say,
Yeah.
you know, maybe I have done something, but
Yeah.
I'm not stepping into that conversation because I'm going to be annihilated.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's a mix. It's messy. It's tumultuous right now. It's a conversation that has to happen. Yes, there may be some innocent people accused that shouldn't be, but for the most part, the people that have done things need a place to be able to come out and say, all right, I have done this and I need help, and be sincere about it. It's a really hard thing to change. Sexual addiction or perversions, that's a hard twist in a person's mind to undo, but it can be done. It's going to take a lot of therapy and some serious consequences in some of the cases. So I don't know if that fully answers the forgiveness question, but it does need to be part of our conversation too.
Well, you know, I
Yeah.
think it ties into the issue of consequences. What are appropriate consequences? What are appropriate consequences for somebody who did something 5 years ago, 10 years ago,
Right,
15
right.
years ago? Are they a completely different person? Are they, you know, do they feel badly?
Have they been a champion for women's rights otherwise?
Exactly. Yeah, you know, and this is, and really, the poster child for that, I think, is probably Al Franken.
Right.
I
You
know.
know?
And I think we have to evolve. You know, there has to be
Yes.
room to evolve. And I, you know, there's a saying, it's not my saying, but I heard that the reason that your windshield in your car is bigger than the rear view mirror is so that you can focus on looking forward with a wider scope and a higher view and a higher vantage point.
Yeah.
Hopefully we've learned something. So we can all look back and say, I should have done that differently, I could have done this different, and we all live in different times. And
Yeah.
I think there's a big difference between being a comedian and being a senator. You know, the environment's obviously very drastically different.
Yeah.
I worked in a bar and restaurant. I was a bartender before I went to law school, and wow, what a different environment that is in terms of working in a day-to-day office, you know,
Yeah.
and what might be acceptable. But looking back on that, I'm sure there's a lot of people I worked with, we probably go, huh, we probably could have behaved a little bit better, you know.
Right.
I think there has to be room in the dialogue for that.
Yeah.
You know, the ability to say, I'm not perfect, I am human, and to look back and say, I could have done that better, and let me evolve beyond that.
Right.
And not just evolve, but be open about that. What you were
Yeah.
saying, take
Yeah.
responsibility and say, you know, geez, looking back, I never realized that by patting that person on the back that way that I was really belittling them, and maybe I was even making them more of a sex object and less of a candidate for promotion. You know, just to
Yeah.
have that insight into your own behavior, but also you have to have a platform to say it out loud. You're not going to be annihilated
Right.
and ridiculed, and be able to evolve beyond that, so that while we're looking backwards, we can focus on looking ahead and making lasting change and bringing attention and
Yeah.
hopefully establishing some guidelines for the workplace to go, geez, I don't want to be in that place anymore. I want it to be a better place to work for everybody.
Right.
So as a reporter, I never give the people I interview the last word, but we are going to make an exception because this isn't a story. And, you know, is there anything that you'd like to see going forward here?
I would. For the survivors that are out there that are being triggered by all of this awareness, who maybe weren't ready to come out and talk, I just want to say Palm Beach County Victim Services is here for them. I want them to call us. They can call us at 561-833-7273. We're here for them 24/7, and they can call just to talk. And we give free therapy, any kind of crisis response. So please don't suffer alone, because people that have been assaulted in any form, it's like a monster that haunts. And until you turn around and bring that monster down to size, and we're there for you to, you know, make that happen. It is manageable, it is containable, and it is certainly something that can be healed from.
Thank you. Kathleen?
Don't be shy. If you're in the workplace and you feel like something isn't right, you're not sure what to do, if you have a good HR department, that's usually a good place to start. A little bit of legal thoughts. Not all complaints are equal, so it's important to really document what's happening, document your concerns, get legal help. Complaining about things that are not illegal won't elevate your legal position at all. And so what I would say is don't be shy. Go to HR, use what's there in the employee handbook, consult your employee handbook. And if you have questions, consult a local labor employment law attorney. I mean, there are lots of us, and not just me. There are plenty of good labor attorneys out there, and we're here to help. You know, we're here to help advance the cause.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much for being with us today. And it is Cathleen Scott, who is in fact a labor attorney and dealing with harassment, civil rights cases, and also Sharon Daugherty, who is sexual assault outreach coordinator in Palm Beach County. And thank you guys, you know, for watching, for tuning in. You know, questions, comments, complaints, that is what we are here for. So just share them on Facebook, and maybe we'll get another conversation going. Thanks a lot.